If you happen to be watching online today, we want to say a quick welcome to you. We're glad you're joining us for that. And a reminder for us all, a thought that we've been expressing here at Reeve this year is this statement: Reeve Church is a place of love, hope, safety, and forgiveness. We believe that in Jesus there's spiritual food for the hungry and living water for the thirsty, and all of us are invited to come and partake of what He offers. So who have you known in your life that was truly generous? Who have you known in your life that was truly generous? And in what ways were they generous? What did they do that demonstrated generosity? That could look a variety of ways, right? I mean, some people are financially generous, and so they give financially to all kinds of causes, benefit people greatly that way. But there's other kinds of generosity as well, right? There's people who are generous with their time. And they give lots of time and energy to people or to efforts. There are people who are really, really generous with their abilities. They know how to do certain things that maybe someone else doesn't have the same skill set. And so they come and they lend their abilities in that way. There are lots of ways in which people can be generous. One more question. How did that generous person that you thought of when I asked that question, how did they impact your life? What sort of impact did they make on you? Or what sort of impact did you observe that was created or caused? What sort of effect came out of their generosity? Well, you might have already guessed today's theme. I have used one word repeatedly today, and that is the word generous or generosity, and that's what we're going to think together about today. We're currently in a sermon series this summer titled Indispensable Truths. The word indispensable could also be defined as absolutely necessary. And so this summer we're thinking about some words or some ideas that we find in the biblical text that fit this category of being absolutely necessary. Please don't be offended if your favorite word is not on that graphic or we don't cover it today. It's not because it's not indispensable. It's because Todd was going to speak X number of Sundays this summer and chose the right number of words to fill in that blank. So today we're going to consider, how is generosity an indispensable truth? So I'm going to take you to a text today, and when we begin to look at this text, you probably are going to think, I'm not sure what that has to do with generosity. So please don't get up and leave. I will explain what I think it has to do with generosity as we think together about it. So we're going to look at Matthew chapter 2. Anybody right off the, that's wrong, Matthew 21. Anybody right off the top of their head know what Matthew 21 is about without looking at the screen? Cover your eyes. Okay, good. So we'll just all get the surprise together today about what Matthew 21 does. So here's what Matthew writes. As Jesus and the disciples approached Jerusalem, they came to the town of Bethpage on the Mount of Olives. And Jesus sent two of them ahead. Go into the village over there, he said. As soon as you enter it, you'll see a donkey tied there with its colt beside it. Untie them and bring them to me. And if anyone asks what you're doing, just say the Lord needs them, and he will immediately let you take them. This took place to fulfill the prophecy that said, tell the people of Jerusalem, look, your king is coming to you. He is humble, riding on a donkey, riding on a donkey's colt. The two disciples did as Jesus commanded. They brought the donkey and the colt to him, and they threw their garments over the colt, and he sat on it. So now you know what Matthew 21 starts with or about. It's what we commonly call the triumphal entry of Jesus, right? It's the occasion where he comes into the city of Jerusalem, and virtually the whole city, with a few exceptions, come and say, we think you're the king, we want you to be the king of our land. And so when I begin to use this text to talk about generosity, please don't throw rocks and say Todd doesn't know what this text is actually about, because I know the main gist of this story is about Jesus and about his triumphal entry and all of the things related to it. However, very often within stories that you read about in the biblical text, there are other little things going on, and maybe not so little things going on besides the main point, besides the main idea that the text is talking about. So we're going to think about generosity from this text. Should I just tell you, or do you already have it figured out? Some people are nodding their heads and some people are looking very confused. I don't know if either of those are good things, but so what I want to talk to you about today is the owner of the donkey and the colt. So have you ever had anybody just walk up to you and take your stuff? Your wife? Well, actually, I reached in my billfold the other day, and I was kind of shocked that there was money in there. And actually, there was more money in there than I thought. I was wealthier than I thought. Generally speaking, we don't just go take other people's stuff, right? We don't generally just walk up and say, "Oh, I've needed one of those for a long time, thank you," and then walk away with it, right? That's not generally how we do things. And yet you get this story that almost looks like Jesus saying, just go over and take this guy's donkey and his colt, and it'll all work out, right? Interestingly enough, in the earlier verses, Jesus even said, and if they ask, what are you doing? Why are you taking my donkey and colt? And just tell them, oh, well, Jesus needs them. And that will make it all okay, right? So please don't hear Todd telling you that it's okay to borrow your neighbor's stuff indefinitely because Jesus needs it, right? It's not that kind of a scenario. But interestingly enough, when you read this same story in Mark's gospel or in Luke's gospel, one of them says, some neighbors said, "What are you doing? Why are you taking this guy's donkey and colt?" And one of them says that the owner said, "Why are you taking my animals?" Right? But in both instances, the disciples say exactly what Jesus told them to say. Jesus needs these animals. Jesus wants to use these animals for a little while. And in both instances, matter of fact, in all of the instances that talk about that, Mark and Luke, the owner or the neighbors, whichever one it was, say, oh, okay, I think that's all right. I think that's going to work. And so I want you to understand two things. One, I don't think Jesus was demanding, just give me your animals, right? I don't think it really worked out that way. I think Jesus was saying, go borrow these animals for a little while, and if they ask, just make an explanation, and this will work out okay. Now, the remarkable thing about this is, I think, is a demonstration of generosity on the part of the person that owns it. Do you know I don't like to loan my stuff out? Do you like to loan your stuff out? Have you ever loaned something out and had it not returned? My dad used to tell me when I was a kid and I would be trying to do something and I was like, why don't you have this kind of a tool? And he would always say, I used to, and then I had kids. And they all got lost and broke and thrown away and they disappeared and somebody walked off and I loaned them to someone and they wandered off and they never came back. I have to be honest with you, I really don't love loaning things out. I don't really love borrowing things from people either. Because here's how this is a Groat uniqueness. This is something that's consistent with all Groats everywhere. If you borrow something from someone, there's 110% chance you will break it and you will spend money buying them a brand new version that you could have spent and bought yourself one for a cheaper price, right? So I don't love doing that. But I know people who are really generous with their stuff. Like if you said, man, I need, and they had one, they'd say, well, here, let's borrow mine. Take mine and use it. Get it back to me when you can. I think when you read this story, that's sort of what you're seeing out of the person that owned the animal. I think what you're seeing is an expression of their general posture toward that kind of thing. I also think probably what you're seeing is something about their general posture toward Jesus, or maybe their general posture toward the work of God. We don't know, according to the story, whether the people knew who Jesus was or not. Right? We don't have an understanding of that, at least in the text, as to whether or not the owner of the animals knew exactly who he was. But what we do know is that when the disciples said, Jesus, the Lord, the Son of God, has need of these animals, wants to borrow these animals for a little while, their response toward God, their response toward letting Jesus use them was that of generosity. Now, to help you out a little bit here, because I know some of you may be like, oh my gosh, Todd has gone completely off the rails. The word generosity isn't even in this story. So why are we using it to talk about generosity? Well, let me tell you two things. One, there are lots and lots of places in the biblical text that talk about generosity very specifically, particularly ones in the Jewish Testament or the Old Testament. Listen to these. I'm not going to put them on the screen. I just want you to hear them. Psalm 37:21. The wicked borrow and never repay. That's about those people that borrow stuff and don't give it back. The wicked borrow and never repay, but the godly are generous givers. It's an interesting idea, isn't it? Psalm 37:26. The godly always give generous loans to others, and their children are a blessing. Psalm 121:4. Light shines in the darkness for the godly. The godly are generous, compassionate, and righteous. Proverbs 11:25 says, the generous will prosper. Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Proverbs 22:9, blessed are those who are generous because they feed the poor. Feeding the poor is an example of generosity. Isaiah 32:8, but generous people plan to do what is generous, and they stand firm in their generosity, meaning if they're truly generous people, they do generous things on purpose. And they will continue to do generous things. There are lots of places that I could have gone to in the Bible and said, okay, here's something that we've said about generosity. But what I want us to think together today is how often we find generosity in biblical stories without the word generous ever being used. We see examples of generosity, of a generous attitude, of a generous activity without that being the main point of any of it. Now, I said this earlier, but I'll say it again. A lot of times when people think of generosity, they think of financial generosity, and that is definitely a thing. And in a church setting, most of the time, if a pastor is going to get up and talk about generosity, most people assume that's a code word for give more money, right? And I wouldn't mind if you decide as a result of today to be generous in a financial way. Many of you already are. But what I want us to think about today is there's other examples of generosity. Generosity that involves other things. So think about some of these. You know some of these stories. You just maybe were zeroed in on the main point and didn't see generosity in it. What about the little boy with the 5 loaves of bread and the 2 fish? Who, when asked, gave them to Jesus, and Jesus fed 5,000 men, and no telling how many women and children with it. Giving up his lunch when he was the only one who had lunch that day, evidently, was a pretty generous thing to do. Or what about the lady that we read about in the Old Testament, in the book of Kings, who at the prophet Elijah's direction used the last little bit of oil and the last little bit of flour she had to make a cake for Elijah? Now, while she's not the main point of the whole story in that instance, what you see is a very generous attitude. Or what about the lady who made a room in her house for the prophet to Elisha to stay in any time he came by? She said to her husband, hey, this guy's doing the work of God. Let's make a room and let them stay there. And that was a demonstration of generosity. Or what about the lady who drew water from the well for Jesus when Jesus asked her to do so? You realize that getting water out of a well takes a little work. You don't go turn the faucet. It's even harder work than the pump handle thing, right? When you're using a rope and a bucket to get it out. Or what about the person who let Jesus and his disciples observe Passover in their house, in a room that they had made available to it? All of those things are examples of someone taking a generous posture, a generous attitude, at the least toward the working of God, and sometimes just in general, or specifically toward Jesus. So as we think about generosity then in a larger sense, and all the different examples that we might see in the biblical text, what are some things that we learn about generosity that make generosity such a big deal, make generosity such an important thing to God, and what makes generosity an indispensable truth? I want to give you 4 things. Not that there's only 4. I just want to give you 4 because, 4 is a cool number, I guess. 4 things. One is this: availability is the greatest ability to God. Availability is the greatest ability to God. Or to say it another way, one of the greatest things we can offer to God is our availability. Our willingness for God to take us, or our abilities, or our things, or our resources, and to put them to work somehow or another for His purposes. You realize that there's not a missionary anywhere in the world for whom one of their core qualities is an attitude of generosity around availability to God. Now, when I was 17 years old, 387 years ago, when I was 17 years old, between the summer of my junior and senior year of high school, I felt like God wanted me to commit my life to His service. My conversation with God about that was really interesting. It went something like, I think I hear you saying that you want me to do this. No thanks. Not interested. Please don't send me to Africa. I'll do just about anything else, but please not. Stuff like that. And then after I got to the point where I realized, maybe saying no to God like that isn't all that brilliant of an idea. It hasn't worked out for other people in the past all that well when they say no. The conversation went something like this. So, what does a punk, awkward kid from Ellington, Missouri, a hillbilly of the Ozarks, have to offer God? You ever had conversations like that with God? Where you sense that God was saying, I would like for you to do X, Y, Z, and your response had everything to do with something like, well, who am I that I would be asked to do this? Now, I've never actually heard the voice of God, like not out loud. I'm not saying that's impossible. There are lots of people in the Bible who did. I think if that ever happened, maybe it could still. I just haven't had it happen to me. But I have had occasions in my life where I had the sense that like God was actually talking to me. Like I didn't hear a voice, but I heard something, right? I heard something in my spirit. I heard something in my soul. I heard something in my heart and mind. And what I heard at the end of that conversation about who am I was this kind of an idea. I heard in essence God saying to me, I want your availability and I will take care of the rest. I want you just to be available to me and I will take care of filling in all the details. Man, let me tell you, if I knew back then that meant I was going to have to go to Bible college and I was going to have to go to seminary and I was going to have to move north of the Mason-Dixon line, I'd have said no way. No, I'm kidding. I just didn't have any idea where that would take me. No idea whatsoever. Didn't know the specifics of it. Didn't know what would be expected, but I just heard God say, I just want you to be available. And I said, okay. Now, granted, God didn't get much when He got me and my availability. But He got exactly what He wanted, which is my availability. I think it's one of the core things that we can learn from the owner of the animals in Matthew. Oh, I've got some animals. Yeah, go ahead. Take them. Use them for your service. It's okay. Just go ahead and do what you need to do because I have it. It's available to you. Listen, I don't think there's any way that we can underestimate how much God will do and how much God can do with a life that is available to Him. The second thing I want you to think about is this. God chooses to operate through the generosity of ordinary people. God chooses to operate through the generosity of ordinary people. It's a remarkable thing, that the God who could and who can do anything He wants to do without any help whatsoever chooses to involve humanity, chooses to involve human beings in the things that He's doing in this world. And He especially loves to do things in this world through people who have attitudes of generosity. They're ordinary people with attitudes of generosity. Let me get you to think about that. Have you ever thought about the fact that we would never have learned the names Abraham or Joseph or Moses or David or any of the 12 disciples if not for their availability and their willingness for God to operate through them because of their generosity in terms of their availability? I mean, come on. God just showed up to Abraham one day and said, "Here, come over here." And Abraham said, "Yeah, well, okay. I guess I will." God showed up to Moses one day and said, "I want you to set my people free." And Moses was like, "I stutter. I can't. I don't have the ability. No, I just want you to be available. I want you to be generous with your availability," and on it goes. Think about those followers of Jesus. I mean, it's not like Peter, James, and John were on the pro fishing circuit and were about to be famous anyway. Right? I mean, that's not the story about who they were. They were ordinary people, but when Jesus said, "Come follow me, come be a part of what I'm doing," they said, "Well, I'm not sure what a fisherman has to offer to this enterprise, but I'm in. I'm going to make myself available." If not for them meeting God or meeting Jesus, and if not for them being willing to follow, to be generous with their self and their stuff, we wouldn't know about them at all. What does this tell me? Well, it tells me that if God can use the generosity of ordinary people like those, He can also use the generosity of ordinary people like, I don't know, me and maybe you. Now, the third thing I want to call your attention to is this, that generosity, or our generosity, writes us into the story of God. Writes us into what God is doing in the world. Do you remember there was a story that happened in the life of Jesus where Jesus pointed out to His disciples, "Hey, you see that lady over there? She just dropped 2 pennies into the offering box. She just dropped 2 pennies into the offering box. But you want to know something? That's a big deal." Why was it a big deal? Why did Jesus observe it? Why did He point it out? Jesus says everybody else who gave from their position of plenty. They gave from their position of having a lot of stuff, and so they were able to give larger amounts because of what they had. But what does He say the lady did that was remarkable? She gave everything she had. She gave all that she possessed into the offering box that day. And Jesus says in God's eyes, she gave more than all the others in some sense because she gave everything that she had. She was, not that the others weren't generous, she was especially generous. We know about her because she was generous. The story wouldn't have made the text. We wouldn't know it. It wouldn't be in there if it wasn't Jesus saying, "Look at the generosity of this person." Likewise, I mentioned earlier the kid with 5 loaves and 2 fish. We wouldn't know a thing about him if Jesus hadn't chosen to take the gift that He offered, or if God had not seen fit to write it into the story, right? I mean, they could have just said, well, Jesus located 5 loaves and 2 fish and fed people. Didn't have to say anything about a little boy that happened to have his lunch with him that day and said, "Yep, you can take my lunch and do something with it," right? We wouldn't know about him. He would not be in the story were it not for the generosity that he had. Have you ever heard the name Joseph of Arimathea? You have, whether you know it or not, because around Easter we talk about the death and the burial of Jesus. And Joseph of Arimathea is the person who went to the ruler after the death of Jesus and said, "Can I take his body down and bury it?" And they said, "Oh, okay, yeah, I'll go right ahead." And do you know what he did? The story says he buried it in a tomb that in his own expense he had prepared for himself. And so out of a posture of generosity, he takes the body of Jesus down off the cross and does some of the burial traditions to it and puts it in the tomb that he made. And listen, he had no idea Jesus was just borrowing it for a little while. Right? And we know about Joseph of Arimathea because he was generous in that way. If you read the biblical narrative, there are countless other stories and countless other people who are in the story of what God is doing in this world simply because they were generous in some way, form, or fashion. Interestingly enough, the opposite of this is also true. That greed or selfishness can write people out of the story of God as well. One of the classic examples is about two people, a husband and wife named Ananias and Sapphira in the book of Acts, right? And there was this thing that started happening in the early church where an individual sold a piece of property and said, "I'm going to give every bit of it to the work of God. I'm giving it all to the work of God." And people were like, "Whoa, man, wow, what faith. That's remarkable. You're so generous." And they did that. And so that kind of became a thing. And there were people doing that. And Ananias and Sapphira looked at each other and said, "Hey, we got a piece of property that we don't need." And so they sold their piece of property. And then they decided among themselves, let's keep some of the money, but let's give the money and say, this is everything we got from the sale of our property, right? And they did. They came to the disciples with the money and they said, "We sold our piece of property like so-and-so did, and here's all the money from it." And God spoke to the disciples and through the disciples and said, "What you're saying isn't the truth." And God even goes so far as to say, it didn't matter if you sold the property and kept some of it and gave some of it to God, right? Nothing wrong with that. You could do that if you wanted to. The problem was in pretending like it was everything, like they were being more generous than they were actually being, and doing it for the praise of people. And according to the story, God immediately took both of their lives because they were trying to present themselves as being generous when they really weren't. And so we know a snippet about them, but they get wrote out of the story because of their lack of generosity. Let me make you a suggestion at this point. So let's be people who are generous and get written into the story of God, instead of being people who are selfish or greedy and get written out of the story of God. And then last of these four that I want to point out to you is this. When we're generous, we get back what we give, and even more than that. I don't know if you noticed or not, but some of the texts that I read earlier in this talk today that were texts that did use the word generosity, several of them said that generous people would receive generosity back, that when they were generous with stuff would come back to them. Some of them were proverbs, and I know a proverb isn't a promise, but it's generally a truth about how things work in life. And so I believe that there's a principle or an idea around generosity that is this, that when we're generous, we get back what we give, and even more. Now, the text that we looked at in Matthew 21 doesn't tell us a thing about the donkey and the colt after Jesus is done with it. but I can assure you Jesus didn't keep it. Right? I'm absolutely certain the story didn't talk about it because it was obvious what happened. The owner got the donkey and his colt back, right? They were generous with it and they got the donkey and colt back. Did he get all kinds of stuff as a result of doing that? We don't have any idea. If I had to guess, knowing the way human nature is, he was probably out one day working with his donkey and someone said, "Is that the donkey? Is that the one that Jesus rode on that day? Is that famous donkey? Is that the colt? That famous colt that Jesus rode on that day?" We don't know tangibly if he got it back or not, but what we know is that this probably worked out exactly the way it was supposed to because of his generosity. Now, you might be wondering, why do I have Luke 6:38 noted there? That's actually for Amy Munson. You tell Amy, Steve, take a picture. You tell Amy that's on the screen. Amy likes it when I put stuff on the screen so she can write it down because if you want to learn how to take notes, talk to Amy. She's good at it, right? Anyway, Luke 6:38 is up there because I'm not going to show you the whole text, but I wanted you to catch it. Jesus is teaching. And he says these words in Luke 6:38, "Given you will receive." You could substitute the word "be generous," and you'll receive. "Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make more room, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back." Well, I don't think Jesus was just talking about money. Though that's a good thing as well, right? That you can be generous with money and have that work out that well. I think as a larger idea, what Jesus is teaching is, if you're generous, generosity has a way of coming back towards you. Good things, blessings have a way of coming back toward those who are generous. Why? I don't know. How? I'm not sure, except that it seems to be a general rule about how God makes things work in His kingdom. Now, just take a pause for a second and don't run out of here saying, "Pastor Todd said the best path toward being wealthy is to give a little bit to God and then sit back and reap the rewards," because it's like interest, right? You're going to get more back than what you put in. However, I would want to say to you that generosity, even generosity toward God, even generosity toward the things of God, toward the work of God in any way, form, or fashion, including financial, has the promise from Jesus in it that it will bring something back. It will bring back what we give and even more. Now, I know if you're like me, I said earlier that I don't love to loan my stuff out, because it has this way of wandering off. And I think sometimes one of my hang-ups around generosity is, what if I give it to God and then I need it? Right? What if I loan that out to somebody and then I need that thing? What happens then? If I give this to God and then I have a bill come in tomorrow, what if I have that happen? Am I going to have enough? What happens if I'm generous in that sort of way? And what I need to remember, and what we all need to remember, if that's true of any of you as well, is that God promises that those who are generous will receive what they need and more. One last thing that I want you to think about today. So why is generosity such a big deal to God? Why does it get written into the story so much? And why do people get in trouble for acting like they're generous when they're not? And why all of this stuff about you should be a generous person? Well, the core reason, I think, is because God operates from a place of generosity. If you only write down one thing today, and if you only remember one thing from this talk today, I want you to remember this last thing. Jesus equals God's generosity. Jesus equals God's generosity. We could go all over the place to talk about that and to reference that and to point that out, but The best known Bible verse in all of the biblical text is out of the Gospel of John, chapter 3, verse 16. Some of you could probably quote it in the King James. I probably could too if I tried hard, but here's how it sounds in modern English. John 3:16, "For this is how God loved the world. He gave His one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in Him will not perish, but have eternal life." John 3:16 says that God was so generous that He gave His one and only Son for our stuff, to take the place of who we are and what we've done and how we have acted. He sent His world. Jesus became a name that we know, a name that we trust in, a name that we put our hope in because of God's generosity. Ultimately, God sets the example of what true generosity looks like by giving His Son for us. And when God asks us to be generous people, in whatever way that looks like, it's one of the highest ways that we can imitate what He is like, is by being generous. Remember that generosity is indispensable. It's an indispensable truth. It's absolutely necessary to our faith if we're going to follow God well, if we're going to imitate God, if we're going to imitate Jesus. One of the best ways we can do it is through generosity. And just a reminder, indispensable generosity in our faith looks like this: availability to God. Recognizing that God chooses to operate through the generosity of ordinary people. Remembering that generosity writes us into the story of God in ways we could never even imagine. And when we're generous, we get back what we give and more. Why? Because Jesus equals the generosity of a generous God. Join me in prayer. Lord, I thank You today that I've been privileged in my life to have known in the past and to know now people who are really generous. I mean, when I think for myself of who are people who are generous, I can easily think of people who have been generous with me, generous in other ways with their finances and their possessions and their skills and their abilities and their talents. Lord, thank You for generous people. Lord, I believe that ultimately people who are generous because You are a generous God and You have put that within us as our possibilities as well. Lord, help us to take a posture before You that is that of generosity. Help us to just make ourselves available for what it is that You want to do in us and through us. Help us to be generous with what we've been given. Help us to function from a place of generosity. Lord, may someone somewhere look at us and say, well, I don't know a lot, but I know that they really do a great job of imitating God in their generosity. They follow the pattern of a generous Jesus. Lord, may You truly do what You have promised, and may You bless all of those that we're thinking of and that we know that are yet alive today with blessings for their generosity, not as a reward, just as a general principle. And Lord, may we hold on to and believe in our hearts that when we're generous, You have a way of bringing that generosity back to us. So Lord, help us to be people who live out the value and the reality, the indispensable truth, the absolutely necessary reality of being generous people. I thank You for being so generous, and I ask this in the name of the ultimate example of Your generosity, Jesus Christ, Your Son. Amen. At this time, if you're able,